My parents always favored my golden brother. When I revealed his manipulative ways, they disowned me. Now they're begging for forgiveness. All right, so here we go. I'm 31 now, and I've spent pretty much my whole life living in the shadow of my older brother Martin. He's 32. I don't know if you've ever had to grow up with someone like that, but man, it's rough. Martin was the golden child. No, seriously, my parents practically treated him like he could walk on water. We grew up in this small Ohio town, the kind where everyone knows everyone, and if you aren't keeping up appearances, you're falling behind. My dad was the high school principal, which was a pretty big deal around here, and my mom owned a couple of successful cafes. So, yeah, they weren't just the Joneses. They were the people everyone else tried to keep up with. Everything was about how things looked, who was succeeding, and who wasn't. Martin? The guy never had a moment where he wasn't succeeding at something. I'm talking from the time we were kids. He was captain of the basketball team, valedictorian, first chair trumpet in the band. It didn't matter what it was, he was the best. I still remember when he won this big science competition in high school. The whole town came out for the award ceremony. Dad even got the school board to hold a special assembly just to give Martin his trophy in front of everyone. I was there too, but not like anyone noticed. I was standing in the background holding my second place ribbon from the county art show that nobody bothered to come to. That's the thing. I wasn't a failure. I did pretty well too. Honor roll, played clarinet in the school band, worked part-time in one of Mom's cafes since I was 15, but none of that mattered. I didn't get the spotlight. Not like Martin. Every time I did something, it was like, oh, that's nice, honey. But when Martin landed his first scholarship, you'd think he cured cancer. My parents threw him this huge party. I still remember the banner they hung up. Congrats, Martin, our future CEO. Me? I was just there, clapping like always. It only got worse as we got older. Martin got a scholarship to Yale, of course, and I ended up at a decent state school. Nothing fancy, but still a solid education. The difference was, Martin was off living in New York, climbing the corporate ladder, while I was stuck in our little town, working at a marketing firm. Every time I tried to talk about what I was doing, I'd get a polite smile and a, "That's nice, sweetie," before the conversation shifted back to Martin and whatever big thing he was doing at the moment. And it wasn't just the success, it was his attitude. Martin wasn't just good at stuff, he knew he was good at stuff, and he wasn't shy about letting everyone know. You could feel the arrogance rolling off him from a mile away. But somehow, he always managed to hide it from our parents. To them, he was still the golden boy who could do no wrong. I started noticing it in high school. Martin was always good at charming people, especially teachers. He'd talk his way into extensions on assignments, and he always had some excuse for why he hadn't done his work on time. Thing is, the teachers bought it every time. I used to think it was just because he was smart, but looking back, I realized it was more than that. He knew how to manipulate people. College is when it really clicked for me. Martin came home for the holidays one year, and I remember him sitting at the dinner table, bragging about how he convinced one of his professors to bump his grade up. He just laughed like it was no big deal. Said something like, "People are easy to play if you know how to talk to them." I remember being disgusted, but back then I didn't say anything. I just brushed it off, thinking maybe that's just how the world works. But it didn't stop there. Martin climbed the ladder fast once he graduated, and his tactics got worse. He'd call me sometimes late at night and tell me these stories about how he took credit for someone else's work or threw a coworker under the bus to make himself look good. I'd listen, trying to stay supportive, but deep down, it made me sick. I guess part of me hoped he'd grow out of it, that he'd see what he was doing was wrong. Of course, our parents never saw it. They were so blinded by their pride for Martin, they didn't care how he was getting ahead. They'd just beam whenever he called home with news about another promotion or bonus. Meanwhile, when I landed my first full-time job, they didn't even ask what I did, just, "Oh, that's nice, dear," before moving on to Martin's latest achievement. I don't know if you've ever tried to call someone out on their crap when everyone around them is kissing their ass, but it doesn't go well. I tried talking to Martin a few times, telling him he needed to stop stepping on people to get ahead. His response? "That's just how the real world works, bro. You wouldn't get it. You're still in that small-town mindset." That pissed me off more than anything. Like, just because I didn't live in New York or work for some big company, my life didn't matter as much? I don't think he ever realized how much that hurt. Hell, I don't think he even cared. It was around this time I started noticing the cracks. Martin wasn't just cocky, he was ruthless, and people were starting to see it. He'd brag about sabotaging coworkers, taking credit for their ideas, and even getting people fired. I remember one story he told me about some project where he intentionally tanked a colleague's presentation so he could swoop in and save the day. He thought it was hilarious. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And the worst part? My parents didn't care. When I finally tried to talk to them about it, they accused me of being jealous. Maybe if you were more like your brother, you'd be more successful, Dad said. That hit me hard. All my life, I'd been trying to prove myself to them, and in that moment, I realized it would never be enough. No matter what I did, I'd always be second to Martin. That's when the distance between us really started to grow. I couldn't stand being around my family anymore, especially Martin. Every time I saw him, it was like he had this smug look on his face, like he knew he was untouchable. And maybe he was. Our parents enabled him, praised him for every underhanded move he made while I was stuck trying to live an honest life and getting nothing but indifference in return. But that all changed one night, at this big family dinner, when Martin said something that made me snap. I don't know what came over me, but I knew I couldn't keep quiet any longer. So, things hit a boiling point last year. It was Martin's big promotion to senior management. Of course, Mom and Dad had to throw him this massive party, right? They rented out a whole banquet hall in town, invited pretty much everyone they knew, family, friends, people I hadn't even seen since I was in high school. It was ridiculous, but also typical. Martin could sneeze and they'd throw him a parade. I wasn't planning to go at first. I was over it, you know? I was sick of being in the same room with everyone fawning over Martin like he was some kind of god. But then, Mom called, practically begging me to be there. "It's a big night for your brother," she said. "Can't you just come and support him? He's family." Yeah, family. The same family that had been treating me like a background character in my own life for years. But like an idiot, I went. I figured, fine, I'll show my face, eat some free food, then dip. I didn't want to be the one they could point at later and say, "Oh, look, he didn't even show up." So, I dressed up, put on a fake smile, and dragged myself to that party. The banquet hall was packed. Martin was in his element, of course, wearing this stupid, expensive suit, talking loud enough so everyone could hear how amazing his life was. It was the usual stuff. His new job, his plans to move into a bigger place in New York, some vacation he and his fiancée were planning to Europe. I'm standing there with a beer, listening to it all, trying not to roll my eyes into the back of my head. It was all going fine. I was keeping my mouth shut, staying out of the way, until Martin got a little too comfortable. A few drinks in, and he started going off, like really going off, about work. You know that thing people do when they think they're hilarious, but they're just being awful? Yeah, that was Martin. He starts bragging, loud enough for the whole table to hear, about how he completely screwed over this junior employee on some project. I didn't catch all the details, but basically, the guy had come up with this big idea, and Martin took credit for it. Not only that, but Martin made sure the kid didn't get a raise because he wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility yet. Martin was laughing while telling this story, like it was the funniest thing he'd ever done. I felt my blood boiling. I looked around the table and everyone was just smiling along, like it was no big deal. Even my parents. I couldn't believe it. No one was saying a damn thing. I should have just left right then, but instead, I stood up. "Seriously?" I said, louder than I meant to. The whole table turned to look at me. Martin, still smirking, raised his eyebrows. "What's your problem?" "My problem? My problem is you just bragged about screwing someone over to get ahead, and everyone here is acting like it's fine," I snapped back. I could feel the heat rising in my face, but I couldn't stop. "This is who you are now? You're proud of that?" The room went dead quiet. You could have heard a pin drop. Martin's smirk faded a little, but he wasn't backing down. "It's business," he said with that smug tone I hated so much. "If you want to get ahead, you got to play the game. You wouldn't understand." And there it was. That line again. Like I didn't understand because I wasn't in New York or climbing some corporate ladder. Like my life was worth less because I didn't make six figures and have a corner office. I laughed, but not because it was funny. "Oh, I get it. You're a selfish prick and you've been using people your whole life. The difference is now you're actually proud of it." Mom jumped in at that point, trying to smooth things over. "Honey, this isn't the time." "No," I cut her off. "This is exactly the time. You guys have been kissing his ass for so long, you don't even care what kind of person he is anymore." Martin stood up now, too. He wasn't laughing anymore. "You're jealous. That's what this is. You've always been jealous because you couldn't keep up." "Jealous?" I shot back. "You think I want to be you? Someone who gets ahead by stepping on other people? That's not success, Martin. That's being a garbage person." Now Dad jumped in, red in the face. "That's enough, both of you. You don't air family business in front of guests." I turned to him, barely holding it together. "Maybe you should have cared more about who you were raising instead of worrying about how things looked to everyone else." I left before anyone could say anything else. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when it was so messed up. I drove home, my hands shaking on the wheel, replaying everything in my head. The worst part? I wasn't sure if I was angry at them or angry at myself for waiting so long to say something. After that, things got tense. I didn't talk to Martin or my parents for a few days. I thought maybe they'd cool down, maybe we could have a real conversation, but nope. The phone calls started. At first, it was Mom, crying, saying I had embarrassed Martin in front of everyone. Why couldn't you just be happy for your brother? She kept asking. I wanted to scream, because he's an asshole, Mom. But I didn't. Instead, I just hung up. Then Dad called. He didn't cry. He was pissed. He said I had ruined the party, that I needed to apologize. Apologize. To Martin. For what? Telling the truth? It was unbelievable. The worst part was, in the back of my mind, I started wondering if they were right. Had I gone too far? Should I have kept my mouth shut like always? But then I remembered the look on Martin's face. That smug, arrogant look, like he could get away with anything, and it didn't matter who he hurt in the process. And I realized, no, I wasn't wrong. I'd been quiet for too long. Someone had to say something. The phone calls kept coming, but I stopped answering. I wasn't going to apologize. Not for that. It wasn't my fault Martin was a manipulative jerk, and it wasn't my job to make him feel better about it. Let them be mad. Let them deal with the fact that their perfect son wasn't so perfect after all. I didn't know it then, but that was just the beginning of what would come next. Everything was about to blow up even bigger, and this time there'd be no going back. So, after that blow up at the party, I thought things would cool down eventually, but I was so wrong. I mean, I knew my family could be intense, but I didn't expect what happened next. I didn't talk to my parents or Martin for about a week after the whole thing, which was fine by me. I figured maybe they'd take some time, reflect a bit, realize I wasn't completely wrong about Martin being, well, a jerk. But yeah, that didn't happen. One night I was sitting at home, just chilling, watching Netflix, when my phone buzzed. I glanced at it, expecting it to be some spam call, but no, it was Martin. I hesitated for a second before answering. The second I picked up, he was already yelling. "You seriously think you can just ruin my career and walk away?" he screamed. I could barely get a word in. "Wait, what the hell are you talking about?" I asked, completely blindsided. I hadn't done anything, so what was he even accusing me of? "I know you've been talking to people, spreading rumors about me at work," he spat. "You always hated me, and now you're trying to screw me over just because you can't deal with the fact that I'm more successful than you." I was so confused. "I literally haven't spoken to anyone at your job, Martin. What the hell would I even say?" "Oh, save it," he snapped. "I know you've been feeding Trevor info." Now, Trevor was one of Martin's coworkers. We weren't close or anything, but I'd met him a couple of times at family stuff. I had no clue where this was coming from, but Martin was convinced I was trying to sabotage him. And honestly, as much as I hated how he treated people, I wouldn't have even known where to start screwing him over at work. "Dude, I don't know what's going on with you, but I haven't talked to Trevor or anyone else," I said, trying to keep calm, but my patience was wearing thin. "You're paranoid." He just laughed, this ugly, bitter laugh. "You always were the jealous little brother, weren't you? Well, good luck trying to bring me down because it's not going to work." He hung up before I could respond. I sat there stunned, trying to figure out where this was all coming from. I hadn't done anything to him except call him out at that stupid party, but it was clear he thought I had some master plan to ruin his life. If only. A few days later, I got an email that made things click. It was from Trevor. Yeah, that Trevor. He wrote this long message apologizing for dragging me into what was happening at their company. Apparently, Martin's bragging about screwing over coworkers had gotten around, and Trevor, who had been on the receiving end of some of that shady behavior, decided to speak up. He went to HR with some complaints about Martin, and it kicked off an investigation. Trevor had overheard Martin talking at a company event about how he outsmarted everyone and how nobody could touch him because he had all the right connections. He said it rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, especially since Martin was already on thin ice with a few people in the office. So, Trevor and a couple of others started gathering proof. Emails, messages, whatever they could find, to show Martin had been playing dirty for a while. And here's the kicker. Someone in HR mentioned my name during the investigation. Apparently Martin had thrown me under the bus, telling people I was jealous and had been spreading lies about him for years. He made it sound like I was some bitter sibling trying to sabotage his life out of spite. I couldn't believe it. He was using me as his scapegoat, probably thinking I wouldn't even find out. It made sense now why he'd called me in such a rage, accusing me of stuff I didn't even do. He was covering his tracks. Now, I was pissed. Not just because he was lying about me, but because he dragged me into something I had nothing to do with. So, I decided to confront him. I wasn't going to let him get away with painting me as the bad guy while he weaseled his way out of trouble. I called him up, and as soon as he picked up, I didn't give him time to start his usual crap. "I know what you've been saying about me at work," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but my hands were shaking. "Trevor emailed me. I know about the investigation, and I know you tried to blame me." There was this long pause on the other end of the line, like he didn't know how to respond. Then he laughed, but it wasn't his usual cocky laugh. It was more nervous. "So what if I did? You've been trashing me for years, always telling people I'm some terrible person. This isn't any different." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You seriously think this is about me being jealous? Dude, you're in trouble because you messed up. Stop trying to blame everyone else for your screw-ups." "You always wanted to see me fail," he shot back. "Well, congratulations. You got what you wanted." I snapped. "No, Martin, this isn't what I wanted. What I wanted was for you to stop being such a manipulative asshole, but apparently that's too much to ask." We went back and forth like that for a while, but it became clear he wasn't going to admit anything. He was too deep into his own lies, too convinced that I was somehow responsible for everything going wrong in his life. By the time I hung up, I knew there was no getting through to him. He was too far gone. Things escalated quickly after that. The investigation at his company got serious, and within a few weeks, Martin was suspended. Apparently, the evidence was pretty damning, and they weren't going to let him get away with just a slap on the wrist. He went from being untouchable to being on the verge of losing his job. I didn't hear from him after that. My parents, though, they were furious. I started getting these long emotional voicemails from Mom, talking about how I was tearing the family apart and how Martin's career was falling apart because of me. Dad wasn't much better. He left me this one voicemail that stuck with me. He said I'd ruin Martin's life over some stupid sibling rivalry. It hurt, honestly. I mean, I'd spent my whole life trying to get them to see me, to appreciate me for who I was. And now, here they were, blaming me for everything, even though none of it was my fault. I hadn't sabotaged Martin. I hadn't gone to his company and said a word. All I'd done was stand up for myself for once. But it didn't matter. To them, I was still the villain. I don't know if things will ever go back to normal with my family. Hell, I don't even know if I want them to. But one thing's for sure. I'm done letting them walk all over me. Martin made his choices, and now he's dealing with the consequences. It sucks that they can't see that, but I'm not carrying the blame for his screw-ups anymore. It's weird, you know? You grow up thinking family is everything, but sometimes it's the thing that holds you back the most. So after Martin got suspended from his job, things just went completely off the rails with my family. If I thought the phone calls and voicemails were bad before, man, I had no idea what was coming next. My parents went into full crisis mode, and I became the #1 target for all their frustration. I don't even know how to describe it. Every single day, there'd be some new message from Mom. First, she'd be crying, saying how much this had destroyed the family and how Martin didn't deserve what happened to him. Then, not even an hour later, she'd call again, angry this time, yelling at me for ruining everything. She kept saying, "How could you do this to your brother?" Like I'd single-handedly wrecked his entire life. I tried ignoring it, but you can only hit ignore on your phone so many times before it starts messing with your head. Every time the phone buzzed, I'd feel this knot in my stomach. And it wasn't just my mom. Dad got in on it too. His messages were less emotional, but way more passive-aggressive. He'd leave these cold, clipped voicemails where he'd be like, "You should be ashamed of yourself. We raised you better than this." Like, seriously? You raised me better? What about Martin? How come no one was telling him to feel ashamed for all the crap he pulled? It was like they were living in this weird alternate universe where Martin's entire career falling apart was somehow my fault. I didn't get it. I didn't talk to HR. I didn't make him do all the shady stuff that got him fired. But in their eyes, I was the one who pushed the first domino. It was maddening. Eventually, my parents insisted on having a family sit down to talk things out. I wasn't thrilled about it, but honestly, part of me hoped it might actually help. Like, maybe if we all sat down and aired everything out, they'd finally get that I wasn't the villain here. Maybe they'd see that Martin wasn't some innocent victim. Spoiler, it didn't go that way at all. We met at my parents' house. The second I walked in, I could feel the tension in the air. My mom was already teary-eyed, and my dad had that stern look on his face, like he was ready to deliver some kind of lecture. Martin was there too, sitting on the couch like he owned the place. He didn't look mad. He just looked smug, like he knew this whole thing was going to go in his favor. I barely sat down before Mom started in on me. She was talking about how Martin was struggling, how he couldn't find a new job because of his unfair firing, and how the family was falling apart because of everything that had happened. You don't understand what you've done, she said, her voice all shaky. I tried to keep calm. I really did. Mom, I didn't do anything to him. Martin made his own choices. You know that, right? She shook her head, still crying. But you pushed it. You didn't have to bring up all those things at the party. You didn't have to embarrass him in front of everyone. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So what? I was just supposed to stay quiet and let him keep screwing people over? You think that's okay? That's when Dad chimed in. It's not about right or wrong, he said, leaning forward in his chair. It's about family. You don't tear down your own family. You should have come to us first. I looked over at Martin, expecting him to at least admit he'd messed up, but he just sat there, completely silent, watching the whole thing unfold like it was a show. I snapped. Are you kidding me? I said, standing up. This isn't just about family. This is about Martin being a manipulative, selfish jerk, and you guys defending him no matter what he does. You don't even care about what he's done to other people. It's like you've put him on this pedestal, and nothing he does is ever wrong. Martin finally decided to speak. I'm not the one who ruined my brother's life, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. I guess that makes me the better sibling. I couldn't believe him, the nerve. You've been screwing people over for years, and now that it's catching up to you, you're still blaming everyone else. You don't even care, do you? Martin just shrugged. That's business. You wouldn't get it. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up and headed for the door, but before I left, I turned back to my parents. You know what's really sad? You guys can't even see what's right in front of you. You're so focused on protecting Martin that you don't care about anyone else. Not me, not the people he's hurt, nobody. So yeah, if this family's falling apart, maybe you should think about who's really to blame. Then I walked out, slamming the door behind me, and that was it. The family sit-down was over. After that night, things went dead silent for a while. No more phone calls, no more voicemails. It was weird, but I was actually relieved. I needed space from all of them, especially Martin. I felt like I was finally starting to breathe again. But the silence didn't last forever. It never does, right? About a month after that sit-down, I got a letter in the mail from my parents. A letter, not a call, which was already strange enough. When I opened it, my stomach dropped. It was this long, guilt-trippy note about how they missed me and wanted to heal the family. But the kicker? They also wanted me to apologize to Martin. They still thought I was the one who had torn everything apart. They even mentioned how they were thinking of inviting Martin to move back home until he got back on his feet. Which was insane to me. Like they were just going to let him waltz back into their lives like nothing happened. No consequences, no accountability, just pure favoritism all over again. I crumpled the letter up and tossed it in the trash. I wasn't going to play their game anymore. If they wanted to keep treating Martin like some golden child who could do no wrong, fine. But I wasn't going to be a part of it. I'd been the scapegoat long enough. That's when I made a decision. I was done. Done trying to fix things with them. Done trying to make them see the truth. Done being the one who always had to apologize when I didn't do anything wrong. It sucked, and it hurt more than I expected, but I knew I couldn't keep letting them drag me into their mess. If Martin wanted to pretend he was untouchable, and my parents wanted to keep enabling him, so be it. But I wasn't going to let it affect my life anymore. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had control. No more trying to win their approval, no more putting up with their toxic loyalty to Martin. It was like a weight had been lifted. And as for Martin, let him figure his own life out. I was done carrying the blame for his mistakes. So, after that letter from my parents asking me to apologize to Martin, I knew things weren't going to magically get better. I was done, and I meant it. They didn't get it. They didn't want to get it. And there was no point in me beating my head against a wall, trying to make them understand. I'd spent so long trying to win their approval, and for what? It always came back to Martin being the favorite, no matter how much he messed up. I was tired, and honestly, I was over it. For the next few months, I kind of kept to myself. It wasn't like I had a huge support system outside of my family, and the friends I did have didn't exactly understand what was going on. I mean, how do you even explain to people that your brother screwed up his own life and somehow it's your fault? The silence from my parents stretched on, which was actually a relief. I think they finally realized that the guilt trips weren't going to work on me anymore. And Martin? No word from him either. I guess he was too busy trying to figure out how to piece his life back together without his cushy job. Honestly, I didn't care what he was doing. For once, I was just focusing on myself, But that didn't mean I wasn't thinking about everything that happened. It's not like you can just flip a switch and stop caring about your family, even when they've hurt you. It sucks. It really does. Because a part of me still wanted them to wake up and realize how messed up everything was. But I wasn't holding my breath for that. Then one night I got a phone call. It wasn't from my parents, and it wasn't from Martin. It was from my cousin Sarah. Now, Sarah and I had never been super close growing up, but we'd always gotten along. She lived a few towns over, so we only really saw each other at family gatherings. She wasn't really in the loop with all the Martin drama, but she knew enough to know things were bad between me and the rest of the family. Anyway, she called out of the blue and we started chatting about random stuff, how work was going, how life was treating us. But then she hit me with something that threw me off. I ran into your mom the other day, Sarah said, kind of hesitating like she wasn't sure if she should even bring it up. I didn't say anything at first. I just waited for her to continue, because I knew there had to be more to the story. She mentioned Martin's been staying with them again, she finally said. Of course. Of course he was back at my parents' house. That was exactly what I expected. No consequences, no accountability. Just Martin, rolling back home like nothing ever happened. Yeah, that tracks, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Sarah paused for a second. Look, I don't want to get in the middle of all that, but she seemed pretty upset, like, she's not taking this as well as you think. That caught me off guard. My mom? Upset? Sure, she'd left all those voicemails, but I always figured it was just part of her whole guilt trip routine. I didn't think for a second that she was actually hurting over this. I didn't know what to say, so I kind of just mumbled something about how it wasn't really my problem anymore. Sarah didn't push it, which I appreciated. We wrapped up the call soon after, but her words stuck with me. I spent the next few days thinking about what Sarah had said. My parents being upset didn't really change anything for me. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. They'd chosen Martin time and time again, and it wasn't like I was going to swoop in and save the day just because they were finally feeling the consequences of their choices. But it still stung. It was weird, though. Part of me felt guilty for not caring more, but another part of me was like, why should I care? They never cared about how I felt. It was this constant tug of war in my head. I didn't want to go back to being the one who always had to make peace, but I also couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, things could be different now. I wasn't ready to forgive and forget, not by a long shot. But at the same time, I didn't want to live the rest of my life completely cut off from my family. Even though they'd hurt me, they were still my parents, and that's not an easy thing to just walk away from. Eventually, I decided to reach out. Not to apologize, not to try and fix things for Martin, but just to see if there was any hope of having a normal relationship with my parents again, without all the baggage of Martin getting in the way. So I called my mom. It was awkward at first, really awkward. She was quiet, like she didn't know what to say. I guess she probably didn't expect me to call after everything that had gone down. We started talking, mostly about random stuff, work, the weather, whatever. Then, slowly, the conversation shifted to the family. I could tell she was trying to tread lightly, probably afraid that if she said the wrong thing, I'd just hang up and disappear again. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of small talk, she brought up Martin. I could hear it in her voice, the way she tensed up when she said his name. He's having a hard time, she said, like she didn't want to admit it but felt like she had to. We're trying to help him, but it's been rough. I didn't really know what to say. I mean, yeah, it was rough, but it was also his own damn fault. I wasn't going to rub that in her face, though. I wasn't trying to start another fight. I know, I said, keeping my voice calm, but I'm not getting dragged into it again. He's got to figure his own stuff out. She didn't argue. Maybe she was starting to see that Martin wasn't some untouchable hero anymore. Maybe she wasn't. Either way, she didn't push it. We talked for a little while longer, mostly about nothing important, and then we said our goodbyes. It wasn't a perfect conversation, but it felt like a small step in the right direction. I wish I could say that everything magically got better after that phone call, but that's not how real life works. I'm still not super close with my family, and I'm still not really on speaking terms with Martin. But things aren't as raw as they were before. It's like the wound's still there, but it's starting to heal little by little. I've realized that I don't need their approval anymore. I don't need to be the one always trying to fix things. They're adults. They can figure out their own messes. And as for me, I'm finally starting to figure out who I am without all the family drama weighing me down. I don't know if things will ever go back to the way they were, but maybe that's for the best. Sometimes you just have to let go of the idea that your family will ever be perfect. and that's okay. I'm okay. At the end of the day, I'm learning that the only person I really need to worry about is me. And that's a lesson that took way too long to learn. But hey, better late than never, right?